I'm serious. Stand down until I get back."
Detective Alan Shepard read the text, but he didn't respond. He also didn't stand down. Pocketing his phone, he looked out the rain-dotted windshield at the dark, deserted parking lot. The raindrops were getting bigger, thicker too, like globs of slush. It was early for snow in Seattle, but he had a feeling they were in for a white Thanksgiving. He didn't mind. He just hoped he'd be giving thanks this year for a closed investigation and some evil sons of bitches behind bars. Or dead. He'd be especially thankful if they were dead, and that was why he was here tonight. Backup would have been good, but he couldn't wait. He was too close and everyone else was too far away. Special Agent Melissa Walker, the one who'd sent the text, was all the way across the country in D.C. to bury her partner. Alan's own partner, Detective Damian Arruda, wasn't involved with this somewhat off-the-books investigation. Alan still felt guilty for leaving Damian out of the loop. Early on, he'd tried to bring him in, but Damian hadn't believed him. He hadn't seen the murder of Alan's beloved wife, Sarah, as anything other than a random act of violence, and the evidence had been on his side. If Alan had been in a clearer frame of mind at the time, he probably would have agreed, and he'd have dropped it. But he hadn't, and his unrelenting obsession had sent him stumbling into the truth that her murder hadn't been random, that it hadn't been isolated, that it was connected to something bigger, uglier, and more violent than even he had imagined. Once Alan had learned what he was really up against, he'd deliberately left Damian in the dark. He couldn't bring him into this. The monsters had already taken Sarah. They weren't getting their hands on his best friend and longtime partner, too. And anyway, Alan wasn't so sure tonight was going to play out by the book. He absently thumbed the pistol resting on the console of his car. It was loaded with a round in the chamber. All he had to do was click off the safety, and he was ready to take out these assholes if it came down to it. Or even if it didn't. Tonight there was a very blurry line between Detective Shepard and the grieving widower in search of an eye for an eye. If he had to falsify a report and claim self-defense, he would. But he wouldn't lose a moment of sleep over killing the man who'd murdered Sarah and one of her students. If Damian were here, he'd never let Alan go through with it, neither would Melissa. Melissa's late partner, Shell, might have been on board with Alan's plan, but there was no way to know that now. Alan suspected he had the man's blessing from beyond the grave, though. If he'd correctly read the writing on the wall, the asshole he was meeting tonight had also murdered Shell. Not only murdered him, but framed his death to look like a suicide, so his family would be denied the survivor benefits he'd worked his whole life to earn. Scanning the rain-blurred darkness, Alan clicked the safety off, then back on, then off again.
"Where are you, asshole?"
He checked his phone. 2:43 a.m., 13 minutes after they'd agreed to meet. There was also another text from Melissa.
"Alan?"
It was almost 6 in the morning where she was, and he suspected she was staring at her phone, trying to will a message to come through from him, ideally confirming that he'd stood down. With a sigh, he wrote back,
"On my way home."
Then he turned off his phone and tossed it in the passenger seat. He didn't like lying to Melissa. They'd been working together on this for months, and she was a damn good agent. He trusted her like he'd trusted few others. She'd want to be there for the end game as much as he would. But she was 3,000 miles away, and the man had wanted to meet tonight or not at all. Alan couldn't risk putting this off and losing his chance. And even if she were here... He glanced at the gun. Its shape was barely visible, nothing but a few planes and angles catching the pale glow from the weak streetlights. Melissa was too by the book to understand his methods tonight, but she'd be relieved to close the investigation, especially now that the violence had gotten personal for her too.